and a very warm welcome. As the year draws to a close, we get you the very first edition of the show that gives you a 360-degree view of the events that have shaped your world. The year 2011 saw the United States trying to hold on to the status of the lone superpower at a time when the world seems to be shrinking under the weight of Chinese economic might. So over the next 30 minutes, we will revisit this year's major global events that have not only changed the global political, social and financial equations, but also set the stage for the year to come. I'm Sana Khan and this is World Panorama. Relative decline of US economic and political dominance became evident in 2011. While America did manage to successfully sneak into Pakistan and kill the most dreaded terrorist, it also faced flack for it. The steady rise of China as a superpower may continue to undermine America's standing politically, economically, and militarily in the years to come.
Baghdad was built by al-Mansur, humiliated by Saddam, and destroyed by the Americans. This Iraqi sentiment echoes the American failure in accomplishing what it set out to do 9 years ago. Many Iraqis believed that the 2003 US invasion would bring them democracy and prosperity after years of war, economic sanctions, and oppression by Saddam's security apparatus. But now they feel betrayed. No one was sorry to see Saddam go. The sentiment was echoed when the last of the US troops left Iraqi soil in December, an emotion America had not anticipated. The reality of the decline of US influence in the world is not hidden from many Americans because it has been a long time coming. The horror of 9/11 unleashed blind patriotism in American society. Americans felt they needed to retaliate. And in anger, it embarked on courses of action that increased its alienation abroad. The war in Afghanistan has taken its toll not only on the US psychology, but also its economy. The war has achieved precious little. Osama bin Laden's death is probably the only positive, but it's a big one. And that, if nothing else, will take America forward a few more years in Afghanistan. United States has just one main problem. The world has changed, even though America does not appear to believe that it needs to change with it. The US economic dominance is being challenged by China and will soon be challenged by India. It can no longer hope to maintain its position as the dominant market player. As of now, US is grappling with the national and private debt that it must deal with. The Chinese nightmare is something that the American dream will now have to contend with. And China is only the largest part of a bigger story. America's traditional allies in Europe, Britain, France, Italy, even Germany, are slipping down the economic ladder. New powers are on the rise: India, Brazil, and Turkey. A phenomena that collectively constrain America's ability to shape the world.
While the US needs to reassess its global strategy, China is rapidly spreading its influence across the globe. The dragon has asserted its power not just in the Southeast Asia, but has spread its wings as far as Africa. Several economists believe that the Asian giant might just replace the US as the largest economy in the world by 2020. Here's a look at the Chinese ambitions.
China's aggressive stance on the issue of navigation in the oil-rich South China Sea in 2011 was one of the main points of discord with the international community, especially with the United States. with US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton declaring that America had a national interest in ensuring unrestricted navigation in the region. Tensions between the two nations flared up, eventually leading to a rather cold meeting of the two military chiefs in July. China expressed displeasure at the joint naval exercises between the US and Vietnam and other countries like the Philippines. Matters came to a boil at a regional summit in Bali when the US proposed to set permanent bases in Australia. After tensions over Taiwan, this issue has now become a potential flashpoint in Sino-US relations. China's growing irritation with India was also apparent at the Bali summit. Trying to penetrate the hitherto Beijing-dominated spheres of influence, India agreed to jointly explore natural gas with Vietnam from two ocean blocks just off the hotly disputed Spratly Islands, culminating in China accusing its neighbour of meddling in its backyard. One reason for India upping the ante in the region is China's growing proximity with Pakistan. Beijing's open support to Pakistan on its foreign policy, as well as its scathing criticism of the recent NATO strikes in Pakistan, has alarmed India. Growing Chinese investments in countries like Burma, Nepal and Bangladesh is also being keenly observed by New Delhi. Leaders of both countries publicly maintain that there is enough room for both the dragon and the elephant to grow, but as their footprints continue to grow, experts believe that there is bound to be more friction in the coming years. China also proved naysayers wrong on the economic front, despite the fears of the much-vaunted real estate bubble bursting. During the past year, China also managed to sustain its surge as a rising superpower with an economy that was the fastest growing in the world. Traditionally, global investors view China's political system to be a major risk. But democratic India's ambivalent attitude to second-generation economic reforms could give its rival an upper hand, as Europe is increasingly looking to China for its trade needs. Giving high priority to economic restructuring and shifting from an export base to a consumption-driven economy meant that the Chinese economy expanded at 10.5% annually in 2011. Africa is the next big market for global biggies in the West, but true to style, China seems to have pipped everyone, including a late Indian surge to the post. According to the latest projections, Chinese investment in Africa is all set to rise to $50 billion in 4 years, with a good chance that bilateral trade will touch $300 billion. That would make China Africa's biggest trade partner, a statistic that is bound to worry the West. Although fears of a slowdown persist, with growth being projected at 8.6%, China is still better off than most of its rivals, as the world average is around 2%. As 2012 approaches, the last communist superpower standing seems poised to dominate the world stage. Potential flare-ups with its rivals, both regional and otherwise, notwithstanding, the dragon looks all set to flare its nostrils in the new year.
Time to take a very short break. Lots more up ahead on World Panorama. Welcome back. While the dragon is getting ready to take off, the European Union found itself in a huge financial mess. The year 2011 will be remembered by Europeans as the year when their sense of financial security came crashing down. Greece wanted a financial bailout, Italy needed a policy revival, and Russia is looking at political reform. Our next story is all about financial survival and hope. 2011 was the year European leaders had to wade through crisis after crisis. Whether it be Greece or Italy, the feeling of financial and political bankruptcy was all-pervasive. 2011 is also seen as the year Greece's political and economic problems finally hit home. The country's debt reached unmanageable heights and tough austerity measures had to be enforced. In February, the reality of the economic crisis hit home when international lenders called for reforms to bring Greece's finances back on track. Protests erupted in June when Greeks put their foot down and refused to anymore. Tens of thousands of protesters marched on Parliament to oppose the government's efforts to pass new austerity laws. June was also the month when the country's sovereign debt ratings fell to the lowest in the world, with Standard & Poor downgrading it to CCC category, a level associated with substantial risk of default. European lenders had no option but to bail out the cash-strapped nation. This financial turmoil became the catalyst for the political crisis that followed. The country's major political parties could not reach a consensus on the required bailout package. It was a race against time for Prime Minister George Papandreou. In October, he announced a referendum where he called upon Greeks to have their say on the bailout. But it was not received well by European leaders, who saw it as a possibility of the deal being thrown out. Under intense pressure, Papandreou revoked the referendum and scraped through a vote of confidence. These short-term political maneuverings laid bare the shallowness of the system. A month later, Papandreou resigned and Loukas Papademos, a technocrat and political independent, was chosen interim prime minister. Now, Papademos has a tough task ahead of him. The biggest of all, he needs to convince the country's creditors that the terms of the latest EU bailout plan will be respected by his government. Without it, Greece will be bankrupt soon. A similar story played out in Italy. The country stared at a staggering debt, zero projected growth, and a risk of default. 2011 was the year when the demand for economic reforms reached a crescendo in Italy. Silvio Berlusconi, the man who had dominated Italian politics for 17 long years, was finally forced from office in November. The reason was there for all to see. The country's debt had mounted to 118% of the GDP, and there was an urgent need for structural reforms and cost-cutting. Berlusconi barely survived a vote of confidence in October, but this lease of life was short-lived. Italy had been forced into the center of the Eurozone debt crisis by his failure to tackle major reforms, and he paid for this failure. His successor, Mario Monti, has now put together a painful series of tax hikes, spending cuts, and a pension overhaul to wade through the crisis. Italy's problems are far from over. The severity of the package has taken a toll on Monti's popularity. But the Premier knows that it's necessary to step on some toes in case he wants the country to bounce back. While Europe was engulfed in the financial crisis, politics overshadowed the financial woes in Russia. Prime Minister Vladimir Putin and President Dmitry Medvedev's ratings are falling. Putin's party, United Russia, is embroiled in accusations of electoral fraud. Despite this, it continues to enjoy a majority, albeit by just a few percentage points. Thousands took to the streets in Moscow in a peaceful rally in December, the biggest such rally since the early 1990s. The rally is being seen as the political awakening of Russia's urban middle class. Putin, who remains unaffected, has a tough road ahead of him. He might be elected president for the third time in March, but that will not ensure a smooth run in office for him. If Europe was grappling with challenges in 2011, India and Pakistan were trying to overcome a few of their own. For the neighbors, 2011 came with a new narrative of hope and peace. While these two nations engaged in dialogue, North Korea is grieving the demise of Kim Jong-il and looking forward to the reign of his son, Kim Jong-un. This was the story of South and Southeast Asia.
If 2010 was a year of failed expectations, 2011 came with a new narrative of hope between India and Pakistan. The two neighbors engaged to take their bilateral relations away from set parameters to new areas of cooperation. If the two were buoyed by the Thimphu Declaration in 2010, then it was cricket diplomacy that took over in March. The Prime Ministers of the two countries met in Mohali at the Cricket World Cup semi-final between India and Pakistan. Though no formal talks were held, but the bonhomie was evident. Foreign Secretary-level talks continued thereafter to try and jumpstart the stalled peace process. Building upon the spirit of mutual accommodation, the Indian Prime Minister and his Pakistani counterpart met in Maldives in November on the sidelines of SAARC summit. The two leaders resolved to pursue a creative, constructive and result-oriented dialogue. The new spirit was evident as Pakistan decided to grant most favoured nation status to India and promised to fast-track the 2611 case. But perhaps the most important turn of events took place not in Indo-Pak relations, but in Pakistan's relationship with the United States. In fact, the incidents of the past year have triggered a freeze between the two countries. The assassination of Al-Qaeda chief Osama bin Laden inside Pakistan in a secret raid by US Navy SEALs triggered what are now soured relations between the allies. Osama was hunted and killed on Pakistani soil just outside capital Islamabad in Abbottabad. Pakistan was stuck between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, it had to explain Osama's presence on its soil, while on the other, it was miffed that the United States carried out the operation without keeping Islamabad in the loop. In the wake of the raid, the trust deficit between the two countries widened. US-Pakistan's relations reached its lowest ebb after 24 Pakistani soldiers were killed in November in a NATO air raid. An already miffed Pakistan hit back at US, asking its forces to clear the Shamsi air base. A war of words followed. Pakistani Army Chief General Ashfaq Qayani sounded the clarion call for retaliation and promised a fitting response if raids were repeated. US lost no time in retaliating and froze all military aid to Pakistan. A sulking Pak refused to attend the Bonn conference that was called for efforts to rebuild Afghanistan. However, the frost in US-Pak relations does not augur well for both India and the United States, as neither country wants China to take advantage. And indeed, China has lost no time in cozying up to an embattled Pakistan. 2011 will also be remembered for the end of dictators and their regimes around the world. Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, Hosni Mubarak in Egypt, and Kim Jong-il in North Korea. The mercurial North Korean leader died of a massive heart attack, ending his 17-year-long rule. He will be succeeded by his youngest son, Kim Jong-un.
Time to take a very short break. Lots more up ahead on World Panorama. Keep watching Rajya Sabha TV. Welcome back, you're watching World Panorama. A dictator was killed, one stood trial, another stepped down and one fled his country. The world watched as the West Asia and North Africa were swept by a wave of uprisings. Uprisings that changed the Arab world forever. The Arab Spring that swept the region in 2011 not only took the world by surprise but also led to the downfall of several dictators. Regimes that had enjoyed absolute power for decades found themselves at the receiving end of deep-seated public anger and frustration. Here's how it all unfolded.
Tunisia is where it all started, and a young 26-year-old Tunisian was the catalyst for the revolution. Unhappy and frustrated with the extent of corruption in his country, Mohamed Bouazizi immolated himself on 17 December 2010. A month of near bloodless protest later, the repressive two-decade-long rule of Zine El Abidine Ben Ali came to an end. The former president fled to Saudi Arabia and sought exile there. Democracy followed, and in less than a year, Tunisia has an interim constitution, has held parliamentary elections, and elected veteran human rights activist Monsef Marzouki as president. Yet, while Tunisia's revolution is ranked as the most successful, there is no doubt that Egypt's is the most important. Egypt is not like Tunisia, or so thought members of Hosni Mubarak's National Democratic Party. Young Egyptians proved them wrong. Like the Tunisian revolution, this time too, the catalyst was a young patriot. 28-year-old blogger Khalid Said was beaten to death by police officers on 6th of June 2010. In the civil resistance that began on 25th of January 2011, 850 died, 6,000 were injured, and the country made Cairo's Tahrir Square its home for 18 days. 30 years of what some called an oppressing regime came to an end with President Hosni Mubarak stepping down in February. Sadly, the revolution did not reach a logical conclusion. Post-revolution Egypt is a troubled state with the military unwilling to cede power. Across the border in oil-rich Libya, for 4 decades, Libya was Gaddafi and Gaddafi was Libya. Naturally, victory for the rebels was not quick to come by. But the rebels too were not ready to take no for an answer. Protests that started in the eastern city of Benghazi in February spread like wildfire. City by city, the rebels gained control of their country. Starting from the east until the capital Tripoli was overrun in August. By October, Gaddafi had been captured and killed, and a new interim cabinet was sworn in. But liberation is not easy to come by as power struggle between the new government and rebels continues. Syria was one of the last Arab countries to feel the effects of the Arab Spring. Inspired by what they saw happen in Cairo and Tunis, 15 Syrian boys painted walls with revolutionary slogans in Dara. The boys, all between the ages of 10 and 15, were arrested, beaten, burned, and had their fingernails pulled out. The foundation for the uprising was laid when security forces opened fire on their families who had marched to the governor's house. Their struggle is considered the most complex of the Arab Spring as the regime still remains in power, although opposition to it is growing. It's still unclear how these uprisings will end. Each is at a precarious stage along the revolutionary path, and all face enormous long-term problems. Problems that cannot be fixed by just overthrowing a dictator. But these protesters have had a taste of accountability. They have ridden the perfect storm of citizen revolt, and they are willing to go back to the streets until their governments get it right.
Moving on, the year gone by was an amalgamation of global events that captured the world's attention. If it was despair in Japan, New Zealand, and Philippines where nature unleashed its fury, there were scandals and controversies in sports, politics, and showbiz which stunned one and all. Amid all this, a commoner became a royal when Kate Middleton married her prince in a fairy tale wedding. All this and more in Kaleidoscope 2011.
The 168-year-old publication News of the World found itself going out of circulation following a public outcry over its ongoing phone tapping controversy. In July 2011, it was revealed that the phone tapping was not limited just to celebrities, but politicians and members of the British royal family as well. The victims of the act included murdered schoolgirl Millie Dowler, relatives of deceased British soldiers, and victims of the 7/7 London bombings as well. Rupert Murdoch, owner of the News of the World, along with several former editors including Andy Coulson and Rebecca Brooks, were held in custody.
Cardiologist Conrad Murray was sentenced to 4 years in prison for the death of Michael Jackson. Murray was charged with involuntary manslaughter for the overdose death of the pop icon. With nearly $2 million in funeral expenses and 10% interest added each year, the prosecution is asking courts to order Murray to pay MJ's children, Prince, Paris and Blanket, more than $120 million in restitution. Hollywood icon and former governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger, shocked America when it came to light that he had fathered a baby with a member of his household staff. According to statements by Gigi Goyette, mother of Schwarzenegger's love child, she met Arnold in 1975. In the wake of the allegations, Schwarzenegger's wife, Maria Shriver, divorced the former action star after more than 25 years of marriage.
On the 11th of March, a massive magnitude 9.0 earthquake off the northeast coast of Japan triggered a 10-meter tsunami, causing extensive damage and washing away entire communities. More than 50 million people were affected, 15,300 people died, and almost 100,000 people were evacuated. More than 8,000 people went missing across 18 prefectures, as well as over 125,000 buildings were damaged or destroyed.
For many in Fukushima, the crisis is far from over. Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, 150 miles northeast of Tokyo, was severely damaged by the earthquake and tsunami. A nuclear emergency was declared following explosions at various nuclear plants in the Fukushima area. It was the world's worst nuclear accident in 25 years. More than 160,000 people remain displaced, and even as the government lifts evacuation orders for some communities, many are refusing to return home.
December saw massive flash floods hitting 2 cities of the Philippines. More than 1,000 people died and another 1,000 are still missing in the wake of the devastating typhoon Washi, the fourth to have hit the Philippines this year. Many of those who died were sleeping as Typhoon Washi caused rivers to burst their banks, leading to landslides. Tens of thousands of people are now living in evacuation centers.
On 22nd February 2011, Christchurch, New Zealand was devastated by a magnitude 6.3 earthquake, killing 181 people, making the earthquake the second deadliest natural disaster recorded in New Zealand after the 1931 Hawke's Bay earthquake. It has been estimated that the total cost of rebuilding to insurers will be around 20 to 25 billion US, making it by far New Zealand's costliest natural disaster and the third costliest earthquake worldwide.
After a 28-year-long wait, the dreams of 1 billion Indian cricket fans were fulfilled as an inspired India on the 2nd of April regained the coveted World Cup. Chasing 275, Mahendra Singh Dhoni led his team of youngsters to a historic win. India crushed Sri Lanka with a 6-wicket victory in a nail-biting finale. The World Cup title was doubly special for Sachin Tendulkar since it was the only achievement missing from his collection, and it came as a fitting farewell to Indian coach Gary Kirsten as well.
Cricket had its share of controversies and scandals this year. But one such incident that shocked the whole world was the spot fixing by Pakistan trio. Salman Butt, Mohammad Amir and Mohammad Asif were jailed on 3rd November for their roles in a spot fixing scandal. Former captain Butt was sentenced to 30 months, while Asif was given 1 year and fellow pace bowler Amir 6 months jail.
July 3rd, 2011 will go down in history as the day when the super Serb Novak the Joker Djokovic dethroned Rafael Nadal from his #1 ranking in world tennis. Djokovic came through 6-4, 6-1, 1-6, 6-3 to end Nadal's reign as Wimbledon champion before overtaking the Spaniard as world #1.
Pope Benedict XVI beatified Pope John Paul II on May 1st at St. Peter's Square, Rome, before an estimated 1 million people. The ceremony declared the Polish-born Pope to be blessed and put him one step from sainthood. The process for Pope John Paul II's beatification was the fastest on record, as never before has a Pope beatified his immediate successor.
And who could forget the wedding of the year, as Prince William finally said "I do" to his beautiful bride Kate Middleton. The royal pair was subsequently made the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. A regal show of British pageantry attracted a huge world audience and injected new life into the monarchy. Before a flawless exchange of vows, a veiled Middleton wearing a lace dress with a long train, the first commoner to marry a prince in close proximity to the throne in more than 350 years, walked slowly through the 1,900-strong congregation.
Despite the good, the bad and the tragic, 2012 will be another year with its own share of ups and downs. And we at World Panorama will be there, keeping a close watch. Thanks so much for watching, and here's wishing all of you a happy and a prosperous new year. See you another time on a brand new episode of World Panorama. Goodbye.